Good evening. I make that 7 o'clock, bang on. Welcome to this evening's edition of the Planning Committee, 20th of May, 2025. Bit of housekeeping before we start. I haven't been informed that there's going to be any fire drills tonight, so I'm not anticipating any, but if there is a fire alarm, please make your ways through the nearest exit. There's those doors there, and assemble at the front of the building, please. Okay, first item of business tonight. Item 1, apologies. Do we have any apologies this evening? And looking around, I can see a full house. That's great. Thank you, councillors. Second item of business. Do we have any declarations of interest on the agenda this evening? And I'm seeing that's a negative response. Thank you. Item 3 on the agenda is minutes of the previous meeting. Are we content to receive that as a true and accurate record of proceedings that evening? If so, can I see a show of hands in support of that, please? Thank you. That's carried. That brings on to the first substantive item on the agenda, which is application for major development, land to the east of Woodside, Baldwin's Gate. And I believe there's a presentation on this, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is for full planning permission for residential development for 40 dwellings at a site which you can see on the location plan on the screen, which is at the junction of the A53 here, the main road through Baldwin's Gate, and the road here, Sandy Lane. The site comprises just under 2.5 hectares of grazing land that is bounded by the existing fringe of Baldwin's Gate to the northeast here, and the ribbon of development along Sandy Lane here to the south. There's an established area of woodland within the site here to the northeast. So in allowing a number of appeals for housing development in Baldwin's Gate, most recently the appeal for the Baldwin's Gate farm site, which is just here across the other side of the A53. Inspectors have concluded that in terms of access to facilities and a choice of modes of transport, the village represents a sustainable location for new residential development. This is the layout that's proposed. So the density of the development would be 16.3 dwellings per hectare. The layout of the scheme has been developed to provide dwellings with active frontages onto both Sandy Lane here and the A53 here. The dwellings fronting onto Sandy Lane would be set back, as you can see here, from the highway, with the provision of a grassed area of amenity space along the front. The dwellings on this part of the site in particular are, oh, sorry, apologies. Would be lower density to assist in the transition from open countryside to the edge of village setting. Higher densities would be provided along the main street within the site. So the proposed housing would comprise 3, 4 and 5 bed dwellings with a mix of townhouses, semi-detached and detached homes. The dwellings would be predominantly 2 stories in height, with a very small number of 2.5-storey dwellings. So these are just some examples of the various house types. Given the variety of dwelling size and density currently in the village, it's considered that the layout proposed would respect local character. So the designs of the house types would include projecting gable detailing, porches and canopies, and stone detailing surrounding windows and doors, full or partial render is proposed on some of the units in white and cream, with a mix of red and brindle bricks to match the local vernacular. So just going to show you a number of images now of the site. So this is on the approach along the A53 coming out of Baldwin's Gate. This is the site on the left. This here that you can see the hedgerow boundary is Sandy Lane. So that's the view from the junction of Sandy Lane with the A53 looking back across the site. That's another one on the approach out of Baldwin's Gate, really. It was just to show you the relationship with the site on the opposite side of the road, which is the Baldwin's Gate farm site, which is currently under construction. So again, there, just that's showing the junction and the site. Over here, that's from Sandy Lane, looking across to the existing development. And this is from further along Sandy Lane, looking back towards, this is the junction with the A53 is kind of over behind these this landscaping here, and the A53 runs along there. And just another one showing back along Sandy Lane towards the A53. So I'll just go back to the site layout. So it's accepted that the development would clearly have an impact on the character of the area through the introduction of new built form into an area of undeveloped land, but the development would be sited against a backdrop of existing residential development, which would assist in ensuring that the scheme would not appear as an incongruous addition to the wider landscape. In addition, the presence of the A53 and Sandy Lane on the boundaries of the site provide a natural barrier to the edge of the built development. Vehicular access to the site would be at this point here on Sandy Lane. So Sandy Lane is an unlit classified rural road subject to a 60-mile-an-hour speed limit with no footways. So the vehicular access, as I say, would be there, and then a primary footway access to and from the site would be provided to the northern corner there, which would connect to the A53 and link the site to the village. So the Highway Authority have been consulted on the application and requested additional information and some amendments to the scheme. And following that, they've no objections subject to the imposition of conditions. So a small number of trees, 8 in total, would be removed to facilitate the development, but the majority would be retained. It is proposed to remove a section of hedgerow from the Sandy Lane frontage in order to provide the requisite visibility displays for the access. To compensate for tree and hedgerow loss on the site, a landscaping scheme is being proposed, which includes the planting of 60 new trees across the site, in addition to significant areas of new hedgerow, shrub planting, wildflower seed planting, and aquatic planting. So a preliminary ecological appraisal that accompanies the application identifies a number of mitigation measures for species and habitats. Chorlton Moss Local Wildlife Site is sited approximately 195 metres to the east of the application site. Members will note that a supplementary report is being published this afternoon, advising that Staffordshire Wildlife Trust have no objections to the scheme, subject to the imposition of conditions. The application is accompanied by a flood risk assessment, which has been updated on several occasions, further to lengthy discussions with the County Council as the lead local flood authority during the course of the application. The proposed development seeks to resolve on-site drainage conditions, including improving the off-site drainage conditions and provide an on-site attenuation area to the east of the site. So the LLFA is now satisfied that the development can be delivered so as not to be at risk of flooding from external sources or from within the development, and therefore raises no objections, subject to a condition requiring the submission and approval of the final detailed surface water drainage design. Severn Trent Water also raised no objections to the proposed development. So the provision of 40 houses on the site would make a substantial contribution to the borough's housing land supply and to the provision of affordable housing within the borough, which must be attributed significant weight. The site would also provide 10% biodiversity net gain, notwithstanding that it's not a mandatory requirement for this application. In terms of harms, it's accepted that occupants of the proposed development would still be reliant on the use of the private car to access higher order services and facilities. The loss of a limited amount of best and most versatile agricultural land must be attributed limited weight, and there would also be some local impact on the character and appearance of the area. Overall, it's not considered that the identified harms are sufficient to significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of the scheme. And on this basis, the application is recommended for approval, subject to Section 106 contributions designed to address infrastructure requirements, and subject to appropriate conditions as recommended in the supplementary report. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Rachel. Next, we have a number of speakers on this item. I'll take the objectors first to the scheme. We've got Adam Jenkinson. Are you here? Would you like to approach the table in front of you, please, Adam? When you're ready, you may start pressing the button at the front. Should turn red. After 4 minutes, you'll be reminded you've got a minute left. You may start when you want to start.
Good evening. My name is Adam, and I've been a resident in Baldwin's Gate for over 20 years. I'm here today representing myself and other residents whom share similar concerns regarding this development. This proposed development raises many issues to Baldwin's Gate and the surrounding area, and I feel these concerns need to be addressed before making a final decision. Firstly, the proposed development will have a detrimental and irreversible impact on the local wildlife and biodiversity. The loss of ancient trees which show evidence of roosting bats and valuable hedgerows will be irreplaceable and will dramatically alter the scenery and character of the village. The planned removal of the hedgerow to the entrance of the site cannot be replaced due to the requirements of the splay. Existing hedgerows contained in the middle of the site are also planned to be removed and replaced with modern timber fencing to home gardens. To the rear of the site, there is a nature reserve with high biodiversity. What impact will noise, smoke, dust, and vibration pollution caused by the development have on this important and diverse wildlife in and around the development? Entering Baldwin's Gate from the west via the A53, the first thing people will see is two massive housing estates as opposed to historic agricultural farmland. The first being Baldwin's Gate Farm containing 200 houses, and now Woodside major development containing 40 houses. There have been many complaints from residents about high levels of dust pollution from the construction of Baldwin's Gate Farm. Will Woodside development also create issues with dust and air pollution? The new water collection pond to the rear of the development raises the concern of increased flooding to the Chiltern Moss footpath, which is used by many residents to walk in and out of the village. If the pool was to overflow during rainfall, rain could flow into the existing stream and have a detrimental impact on the residing nesting wildlife and Chiltern Moss public footpath to the rear of the site. To the north of the site, there is a new pedestrian access that leads onto the extremely busy A53 main road. The existing pavement on this main road is incredibly narrow and dangerous for pedestrians to walk along due to the speeding traffic, large HGVs, and lack of railings or barriers to protect residents. The proposed development will also be directly overlooked by the large 3- and 2-story detached houses on Watering Close lakeside. This raises privacy and security concerns to the new residents. The streetlight pollution from the site will also negatively impact the surrounding area, as currently there is no lighting in this area and would mean existing residents living next to the site would have to adjust to this addition. The entrance to the development is located on a narrow countryside road that is regularly used by large farming vehicles, lorries, and high volumes of regular traffic. There are no pull-ins along this road, and cars frequently become stuck due to the width of vehicles like the bus. Woodside is a national speed limit 60 miles per hour road with no pavement, street lighting, or pedestrian safety. A major concern is the ongoing severe flooding at the entrance to Sandy Lane from the Woodside Road, which borders the development site. Photographic evidence of the flooding has been uploaded in the objection letters. The flooding has been reported to the council many times, and there has been no permanent fix to resolve this issue. The residents of Sandy Lane and Woodside are frustrated with severe ongoing flooding, and this is having a negative impact on their quality of life. Residents have had to resort to making flood defences by using sandbags and rock walls at their own expenses to reduce further damage to their properties. The flood can linger for weeks, and the splash from cars is damaging the bordering hedgerows. With increased houses and cars from the Woodside development on the bordering land comes increased impermeable surfaces like new roads and driveways. This increases rain runoff and flood risk in the vicinity. As for amenities, there is very little in the village. The post office shop does not stock all the necessary items for a weekly shop, and job opportunities are lacking, meaning people will have to rely on driving to the nearest towns, which are Newcastle, being a 6-minute mile and 20-minute car journey, or Market Drayton being a 10-mile, 25-minute car journey. The nearest dentist is 5 miles away in Madeley and is not taking on new patients. The main GP is also located in Madeley, and the smaller surgery in the village opening times are 9 to 12 and lacks the facilities like multiple GP and nurse rooms and parking compared to Madeley practice to accommodate all patient needs. The bus service does not go to Madeley. An extension of classroom space was added to the local primary school when 113 houses were built on Meadow Bank due to the overcrowding. With the addition of 200 houses at Waldinsgate Farm and now the additional 40 houses at Woodside Development, even more additional classroom space will be needed to accommodate the increase of children attending the school, which is not sustainable. Currently, there are 75 objection letters on the council website for this application and not a single supporting letter from members of the public. If people wanted houses built here, then surely more people would have supported this proposal. I ask the councillors to reflect on the concerns that I've raised and to also consult the objection letters before making a final decision. I, along with many residents, are passionate about caring and sustaining the beautiful countryside that we are so lucky to have. If more housing developments are to continue, then soon there will be none of this. Thank you for your time and giving me the opportunity to speak on this important matter.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkinson. Next, we have Mr. Neil Walker. Same conditions apply, Mr. Walker. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members of the committee, and thank you, Chair. I speak this evening on behalf of Whitmore Parish Council, and the views I express are those collectively shared by the Council. Once again, I find myself here in response to yet another planning application put forward by the Council's Planning Department, recommended for approval. As ever, with little consideration for the real and lasting impact on a village already under siege from relentless development. We warned this committee that approving previous applications would be the floodgates to further developments. That warning has now become a reality. This is just the beginning. There is a growing and deepening concern amongst residents that the planning officers are not acting in the best interests of the countryside. Instead, their approach appears dismissive and their methods increasingly opaque. From the outside, it seems this committee is either unaware of or unwilling to confront the consequences of these decisions. Either way, public confidence is eroding. I have sat through many of your meetings. While some members are quick to comment, the committee as a whole appears powerless, frustratingly ineffective. Even the chair seems constrained, guided by not by public interest, but by the officers who, in practice, control the outcomes of these meetings. So I must ask, who is really in charge? To be clear, I do not doubt that councillors serve with good intentions, but good intentions alone are not enough. I have yet to witness a decision from this committee that is meaningfully considering the long-term impact on the local communities.
Mr. Walker, have you got a comment to make about the application?
Well, I'll be getting there in a moment, if you give me a moment, Chair. We are frequently told by the neighbourhood plan is out of date and therefore not a material consideration. And yet the council's own policy director has told me that the neighbourhood plan is not out of date. This is just one example of how the facts are twisted to suit a predetermined outcome. The housing need numbers cited are manipulated to justify developments, whether it's in Baldwin's Gates, Madeley or Loggerheads, and local voices are consistently ignored. It begs the question, why have a committee at all if officers are the ones driving the decision? As a member of the liaison committee with Bellway, I can report that they intend to build one house per week. This equates to nearly 4 years of disruption to the community. This new application, Chair, seeks to ride on the coattails of 200 home appeal decision, using it as a green light for even more development. Many of the justifications in the proposal are lifted directly from the appeal. You are told that highways raise no objections, yet I understand that position may well change in the coming weeks. We're told utility providers have no objections. What's not made clear is, in some cases, they legally cannot object. I confirm this directly with Severn Trent Water. These are the sort of details this committee must interrogate, not overlook. I say this with regret. I no longer have confidence in this committee. You are being misled, you are being used. Most of you are not planning professionals, and officers exploit this. They count on your limited time and attention to push through decisions. That is why I urge this committee to properly scrutinise the material you are given. I would ask you to pause. Delay your decision until you are fully informed. You have that power as a committee. Do not allow yourselves to become a rubber stamp for decisions made elsewhere. Some of you may disagree with this position. However, after attending and observing many of these meetings, I can tell you there is a troubling pattern, and denying it serves no one. Should you be minded to approve this application as officers hope, I strongly urge you to take at least some modest steps to mitigate its impact. Specifically, I request that the condition be imposed preventing any work from commencing on the site until the Bellway development has completed. This is entirely feasible within the applicant's 5-year window and would provide the community with a much-needed respite from the ongoing disruption caused by multiple simultaneous developments. Furthermore, given the site's history of flooding, I urge that the developer be held financially responsible for any flood-related damages to homes for up to 5 years following the completion of the development. I'd also like to finally add, in the past 10 years, Baldwin's Gate has doubled in size and has been classed as sustainable. If we were to double the size of Newcastle-under-Lyme in the same period, would anybody in this room or in the planning department class that as sustainable? I don't think so. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. We now have a supporter of the scheme. Mr. Ian Gilbert, would you like to come forward, please? You may begin when you're ready, Mr. Gilbert.
Thank you, Chair. Members, for taking the time to consider our comments today. My name is Ian Gilbert. I'm a planning director and agent for the applicant Jones Homes and Renew Land. First of all, we'd like to thank your planning officer for their comprehensive report. We, of course, welcome their positive recommendation, but note this follows a great deal of cooperation and very detailed work between officers and applicant over the last 24 months. As set out within your report, the principle of development is clear. The site is being promoted in line with the presumption in favour of sustainable development, which is engaged due to the council having a local plan which is out of date and no 5-year housing land supply. The neighbourhood development plan is over 5 years old, relates to an out-of-date housing requirement and doesn't allocate sites for housing, which is why it's out of date. In essence, the NPPF therefore supports development in sustainable locations, provided there's no technical reason to refuse an application. Your officers have confirmed the sustainability of Baldwin's Gate and its suitability for development, as of recent appeal decisions. Furthermore, the council's submission draft is at local plan examination, and it confirms Baldwin Gate is a settlement which will need to accommodate some growth. The applicant site, through the council evidence base, through the council's evidence base for the plan, has been shown to be equally as sustainable as other sites promoted to be allocated within Baldwin's Gate. It's worthy of note that the emerging local plan does not seek to provide a cap on the scale of development which should be provided at Baldwin's Gate, and our proposed development is commensurate with the level of growth directed towards the village. It's of course necessary to consider whether the details of the development is in accordance with local and national policy. The report from your officers comprehensively addresses all material planning considerations and correctly concludes that the proposed development accords with all relevant planning policies. I'll briefly touch on some of these key considerations. The development comprises a scheme of well-designed homes that will sit alongside adjacent development at Bolwinsgate Farm and deliver a new high-quality, well-landscaped and definitive edge for the village. And I note some of the comments from objectors earlier about how the two sites will sit together. We consider that creating this new definitive edge to this boundary of Bolwinsgate then prevents that this in essence forms the new line of the rural and the urban or the village. Apologies. The scheme will respond to local character, has been developed through extensive conversations with your officers as well as through a design review panel. The scheme will deliver open market housing and 25% affordable housing, providing a mix of housing to meet specific local needs. The scheme will provide access to the local highway network through a new access onto Woodside and on via the new roundabout proposed as part of Bolwinsgate Farm without having a detrimental impact on highway safety or the operation of any of its junctions. Pedestrian access will be provided onto Newcastle Road, and the council's highways officers have carefully considered the scheme and do not raise an objection. With regards to biodiversity, the applicant is committing to deliver a 10% biodiversity net gain, notwithstanding there being no requirement for them to do so. The net gain will be delivered through a mix of on-site measures and financial contributions, including a significant increase in hedge and tree planting through the site with a net gain of over 50 trees and 400 metres of hedgerow. The built development and drainage scheme for the site has been redesigned to avoid the removal of or any off-site impacts on peat. The development will not result in the loss of usable, best and most versatile land. The site is in an area of low risk of fluvial flooding with a comprehensive SUD scheme will overcome and improve off-site surface water issues to the benefit of new residents and the existing community. The scheme falls below the council's threshold for the provision of on-site play space, but we will be contributing nearly £250,000 towards off-site public open space, as well as other financial contributions, including £300,000 to education and £35,000 to local health infrastructure. In relation to all other matters, the scheme has been designed with the utmost care technically and is considered to be acceptable with regard to all technical planning matters. Accordingly, we respectfully request that you support the recommendations of your planning and technical officers in concluding that planning permission should be granted. Thank you, Chair, members.
Thank you, Mr. Gilbert. You may return to your seat. You ready to comment? I'm just going to have a quick. Okay. Officers haven't got a comment to make, but I've got a comment to make, and I'm very disappointed. I can understand the emotional issues that planning applications like this take place, but I refute the allegations that this committee is ineffective and the slur that was inferred to the members of this committee, who I think are very professional. Order. Take that back, Chair. You're not allowed to speak. Thank you. We've had enough of this. Thank you. Thank you very much. Just to finish what I am to say, if people realise that planning is a complicated matter and we have to adhere to the law of the land, and now the laws and policies are in place and we're guided by our excellent technical officers to such needs, and also that the memories of certain people will also include the fact that we've, as a committee, have turned down applications in Bolwinsgate only to have them overturned by the planning inspectorate that have gone against our initial recommendations. So I think I just need to make that clear that that is refuted. So with that, further ado, I'll hand it over now to members for comment. Thank you, members. Councillor Bryan.
Thank you, Chair. If I could ask planning officers some questions that I've got just on going through the documents, if that would be okay. I can see that in the documents it said that there are insufficient number of school places in the local area to mitigate the impact of this development. for both primary and secondary phases of education. How can we possibly grant a planning application that doesn't allow the children that are going to be living there somewhere to go on and live their school lives in the local area? My next question is just around the Staffordshire Wildlife Trust. They requested the submission of, and excuse my pronunciation of any of these if it's not quite correct, hydrology surveys, evidence and justification of why the development is exceptional, so the loss of irreplaceable habitat, a biodiversity net gain assessment, and further information on great nested newt surveys. Were those supplied? I appreciate the supplementary said that they had no objections, but were those documents supplied to Staffordshire Wildlife Trust? I also saw that there was no response from waste, and if officers could just show me the display again, please, of the site, and we could just see what was going to be adopted roads and what wasn't. I've got a few more, but I'll leave it there, I think, for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Bryan. Officers like to come back on that one, please.
So, thank you, Chair. First of all, Councillor Bryan made reference to the lack of school places. So what the Education Authority is saying there in their consultation response is that there are projected to be insufficient number of school places to mitigate the impact of the development. Therefore, they are seeking a substantial financial contribution, which is just over £303,000, and that is sought in the recommendation on the front page of the report, seeking that contribution. So that would be paid to the County Council as the Education Authority to go towards whatever they feel is necessary to accommodate the additional impact that would be generated by this development. So whether that's increasing the number of classes at the primary school, or extensions to either the primary school or the secondary school, etc. So that's the whole reason why that financial contribution is sought, is to mitigate that impact. In response to your question about the information that was requested by Staffordshire Wildlife Trust, yes, all of the information that was requested has been received. There's been various discussions with Staffordshire Wildlife Trust, meetings between officers, the developer and members of the trust, and on the basis of those discussions and the additional information that's been submitted and demonstrated to their satisfaction that there won't be any significant adverse impact, they are satisfied, as the report says, subject to a number of conditions which are followed through into the recommendation, which are requesting ecological mitigation. And then finally, in terms of waste, yeah, we've not had any comments from the council's waste team, but the main road through the site here is to be adopted. So these the dwellings that are on private drives, so here, this group here, will be there will be bin collection points for them. So I think there are, I did a count up before the meeting, 18 out of the 40 properties would need to use the bin collection points. Thank you.
Do you wish to come back on that?
Yes, please, Chair. Just going back to the first point about schooling, where does it say that the contribution will mitigate the implication of the 40 homes? I see that paragraph you're talking about, and I can see the total contribution, but where does it actually say that will allow 40 houses worth of families the opportunity to be able to use the local schools. And also that money, I appreciate you say it goes to the county for them to determine. Will it go to the local primary and secondary school, or is that for the county to decide? And just going back to the waste point, it's another application where I find it really frustrating that these houses don't have adopted roads outside them and a bin that can be collected from outside their property for a reason that I cannot see. There's not an ancient tree that we're trying to retain in where those some of those properties are. So it's not so much a question, but just more of a point that it's just another one where it's frustrating. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bryan.
Just in response to your question about the education contribution, what is within the agenda report is a summary of the comments received from the Education Authority. They submitted 2 pages of information, and clearly we can't put all of that within the report. And within there, they set out quite clearly the methodology behind they project the number of school places that will be required based on the number of dwellings. And from that, they then go on to say that there are projected to be an insufficient number of school places. And they then go on to say that that financial contribution is required. And importantly, the Section 106 would set out in specific detail what that money is required to be spent on, and it has to meet a number of tests to be compliant with the regulations, and it has to be directly related to the development. So it would have to go on the schools that are impacted by this development, and it wouldn't be appropriate or even legal for it to do otherwise.
Thank you.
I'll let someone else speak for a bit and come back. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Gordon.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a number of questions, but there's one question really, and apologies to other members if you've all sort of got this clarified, but I'm still a little bit uncertain about this. And I do think it's important, and it's about the impact on the local wildlife site. Now, my understanding from the original report is that Staffordshire Wildlife Trust wanted a survey undertaken to gauge the impact of the development on the wildlife site, which seemed to me to be a perfectly reasonable request. I'm a little bit unclear now. Have Staffordshire Wildlife Trust decided not to pursue that? Has a survey been done, in fact? Are we in a position to actually say what the consequences for the site would be if the development goes ahead? I'd just like some sort of clarity around that, Chairman. And on this same sort of issue of ecology, the report makes reference to a breeding bird survey being recommended, and mitigation measures arising from that report should be adopted. Has that actually been accepted by the applicant? And if I could just end with this question, Chairman, about these bins, what's the distance between the bin stores and the houses? In other words, how far will residents have to drag the bins? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. Would you like to come back?
So looking at ecology, first of all, so yes, a preliminary ecological assessment has been submitted, and that looks at all the different, sorry, just bear with me, all the different species that are present, and looks at potential mitigation measures to make the impact on those species acceptable. But in addition to that, because of the proximity to the local wildlife site and this protected peat bog, there are additional issues to do with hydrology and the water content, etc., of the land and the impact that any development could have on that. So additional information was requested by Staff's Wildlife Trust in relation to that as well. A hydrology survey, other documents have been submitted, and they've considered all of that information, and on the basis of that, as is set out in the supplementary report, they have no objection. So they're satisfied that the development will have no significant impact on either the habitats or the species themselves, or on the nature of that local wildlife site, subject to conditions which require various mitigation measures to be put in place. And then bins was the other thing, wasn't it? So breeding birds is one of the species that was considered, and they're satisfied again with the conclusions of that report in relation to breeding birds, subject to the conditions which are recommended within the recommendation.
That's been accepted by the applicant.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So I do have a plan which I can share with you to show the distances, the drag distances for bins. So a bit difficult to see on here because it's in a light colour, but you should be able to see. So for each of the properties that will need to take and collect their bins from the bin stores, there is distances marked on to show how far the occupiers would need to take their bin. So it varies. There's 15 metres, 19 metres, 25 metres that we can see there. And it does vary across the site, but importantly, all of the distances are below 30 metres, which is the distance recommended in building regulations. So we don't have any planning policy that sets out what are acceptable distances, but the building regs does recommend 30 metres for residents to have to take their bin to the bin store, and it recommends no more than 25 metres for the bin operatives to collect the bin from the bin store. And so all of the distances comply with those figures. Thank you.
Councillor Fear.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow on from what's just been said, and Councillor Gorton and Councillor Bryan have sort of preempted me here. I note with a great deal of disappointment that we are talking about almost 50%, 45%, I think, if we're going to be technical, of houses which will not have curtilage provision for disposal of waste. 25 metres, yeah, in a way that's right, but of course you've got to walk back to your property after you've taken your bin out, unless you're one of these very eccentric people who perhaps wants to stay with their bin all the time, who knows. But that of course then goes up to 100 metres, doesn't it? Because you have to go and get the bin back again. When we look at that plan, well, the plan's gone now, but I can see it in my mind's eye. Sometimes developers, of course, use an excuse that they want to have a softened road. They're actually, of course, trying to save money. That's what they're really doing. When they don't adopt these highways. In this case, I note there was a T-junction or a T-dead end in the heart of this development where no excuse that this has been softened to help the landscape could be remotely approached. appropriate. I mean, this is just, in my opinion, a rather cynical way of trying to save money. The area I'm talking about there is in the centre of the plan. Going on to other matters, though, which I think are important for us this evening, I'd just like to make sure I'm right about one thing, and then I would ask, because this is quite a complex and ever-changing point, that an officer could take us through the other one. So my first question is, am I correct in thinking that it's paragraph 14B of the MPPF, which is effectively excluding the neighbourhood plan from having heavy weight in these considerations, namely the one which says that, all right, it's within 5 years of formation, it does not include allocations about housing, and that's precisely noted within the national document, and it seems to me that perhaps is why our report says what it is. So that would be a straightforward question. Am I correct in that? My second question is also, of course, about the MPPF and the weight we have to give to things if we do not fulfil a housing number. Now, those numbers, of course, have changed and keep changing over time. The current government changed those numbers in December of last year, and I'd just like our officers to take us through where we are on our housing supply vis-a-vis what we're meant to do nationally, and how that affects the decision we should be taking this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Fear. Yeah, that's best.
Thank you, Chair. Right, in response to your first question about paragraph 14, there is actually an error in the report, so apologies for that, but it's actually both points A and B of paragraph 14, which mean that we're unable to give the neighbourhood plan any significant weight in its own right, and that's because the neighbourhood plan is actually more than 5 years old now, and so yeah, both the age of it, but also the fact that there aren't any allocations within there means that it is out of date. So the council's position up until December last year was that we had a 5.2 year supply of housing. The MPPF, as Councillor Fear mentioned, was revised in December, and the number of houses that we're required to provide has increased, which means that the council's position is that we only have just around 3 years, 3.1, I think, year supply. So we're significantly below the 5 year supply that we're required to demonstrate. So in those circumstances, the paragraph 11D of the MPPF is the important one, and we have to, as it says in the report, we have to, the starting point is to approve sustainable development, and where there are no relevant development plan policies, which there aren't, or we don't have a 5 year housing land supply, then we have to, I'm just trying to find the wording, approve development unless the harms significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. Now, as I set out at the end of the presentation that I made, the significant weight needs to be given to the benefit of the provision of additional housing, because we are so significantly below what we're required to demonstrate. So the benefit of that provision of housing needs to be given significant weight. There's also the weight to be given to the affordable housing. And then against that, we've got the harms, which I set out in your officer's view is the loss of a limited amount of best and most versatile agricultural land, some very localised impact on the character and appearance of the area, and that the harm that was identified and agreed by inspectors but was accepted as limited harm, which is the reliance on the private motor car for some trips that you can't provide locally. So it's considered that those benefits outweigh those harms.
Thank you, Rachel. Councillor Fear, do you wish to come back on that?
Not on the explanation that we've just heard. I think it is important for us to be cognizant of the fact that that in some ways the rug was pulled from under us at the end of last year. We have to live with that, and there is an issue there, of course, about what would happen were this application to be refused and then go to appeal. As regards the MPF paragraphs, I take what's said. I'd assume the date was just within time, but if it's not within time, it's not within time. But the officer has confirmed what I thought about the second sub-paragraph there in that regard. Beyond that, I have nothing to say except I am extremely disappointed about the in my opinion, rather cynical approach to refuse collection.
Thank you, Councillor Fear. Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Chair. Stop me if I go off-piste. I have a rhetorical question. It's not for officers to answer. I suppose my rhetorical question is, haven't the people of Baldwin's Gate suffered enough? I thought the first public speaker spoke very well. It was a tour of some of the objections that have been raised by representations made by members of the public and by the parish councils locally. We've discussed in some detail certain aspects of it, like refuse collections, which I know this committee looks at quite often. And I honestly can't think that any development of this quality on Greenland outside of a village should need any properties at all to have to walk 30 metres or less to present their refuse for collection. But that, in my view, is an extremely small element of why the application is undesirable, in my view. I have to say, we've been given an insight from our officers and through the questions asked by other members about the difficulties associated with refusing the application and the potential pitfalls of doing so. But I remember voting, and lots of members of this committee did, I remember voting for our local plan, which was under examination in this very room, perhaps not in this half of the room, but it was certainly, there were people present earlier in the day, and that local plan is being examined. This application is on land outside of that. This is not allocated in our local plan. We've heard about the neighbourhood plan, and we've been told we can only attach limited weight to it because it's out of date. I don't have to vote for this. I voted for the local plan. I won't vote for this. I'll make very clear I will not vote for the application tonight. But whether or not I'm able to sustain a refusal and to get other members of the committee to vote the same way is still up for debate. And I want the members of the public in the public gallery to understand that if we were tonight to refuse the application, there is every possibility that the Secretary of State will approve it on appeal. And my grave concern is a costs award. So not only does the Secretary of State say, yeah, you're going to have these houses built, but also our taxpayers and the villagers of Baldwin's Gate will be hit by a double whammy because their taxes will go towards paying a fine effectively for this authority not making a decision that the government and its planning inspectorate consider reasonable. All of which being said, I think that there are reasonable grounds to look at refusing the application. I think we've heard already that loss of best and most versatile agricultural land is only limited because of the size of the land that's being lost. But that's true. The amount of land that you lose scales with the size of the development that you're putting on it. So if the development was twice as big, we'd lose twice as much land. If it was half as big, we'd lose half as much. That doesn't seem to me to be a particularly strong logical argument. Either we're losing it or we're not. Either we're losing the habitat or we're not. Either we're going to lose the trees or we're not. Either we're going going to impact on the ecology towards the east of the site, which to my view looks as though there is an awful lot of going into flood mitigation there. So we're going to have a lot of critters with very wet feet and potentially harm, has been acknowledged, harm to that ecological site. All of which taken together, in my view, the harms outweigh the benefits. And that would be my basis tentatively for refusing the application. But I would be interested in hearing from officers as to what the risks associated with that are, particularly when it comes to a potential appeal and the potential for the inspector to ask, is the decision we made tonight reasonable? Because I want for us to be reasonable. I think it is reasonable for us to look very carefully at this application. And that would be my view at the present time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Hond. Do you wish to say anything? Thank you.
You might have to remind me of the adverse impacts that you said, but the loss of best and most versatile agricultural land, first of all, yes, I mentioned when I was summarising it that it is just a small amount, but the report sets out in a bit more detail that practically speaking, the best and most versatile agricultural land within that site is two small areas, two isolated areas that are split by land that isn't best and most versatile. So in practical agricultural terms, the land could not be farmed separately, and so the entire unit would be treated as not best and most versatile agricultural land. It would be at the lesser quality. So it's not just saying, well, it's a small amount, therefore it's fine. It's actually looking at how it would be farmed in practical agricultural terms. But then even moving on from that, even if we weren't going to look at the practical issues, we would have to give weight to a number of appeal decisions that we've had recently, not just in Baldwin's Gate, also in Loggerheads, where there's been a loss of best and most versatile agricultural land, larger areas of such land, and the inspectors have concluded that that harm against this substantial or significant weight of the benefit of the provision of housing, given that our lack of housing supply wouldn't carry. So I would be concerned about using that as but I know you're talking about kind of a combination, aren't you, of harms. I think just the other one that you mentioned, the ecology. The risk of us having costs awarded against us would be whether we had behaved reasonably or not. And it's obviously members are perfectly entitled to make a decision and to weigh things differently than officers have, for example. But in weighing those harms into the balance, we need to be demonstrating the harm. And ecology, for example, we've got our experts, Staffordshire Wildlife Trust, saying that they are satisfied that, subject to a number of conditions and detailed mitigation measures, they are satisfied that there won't be any harm. So for us to say that there will be harm when your expert is saying that there isn't, puts us in a difficult situation. And I can't remember what other harms you said, sorry.
I may touch on them again. With your permission, Chair, just to respond immediately to that. Either a tree is cut down or it's not, and there is loss of habitat associated with this application. And it is not correct to say that Staffordshire Wildlife Trust or any other expert has said there is no harm. What the Wildlife Trust are saying, I think, and I'm open to being corrected by an officer if you have a quote in front of you, is that those harms can be mitigated. And the mitigation of harms is a matter of judgment. And in my judgment, I am not certain that installing new hedgerows is as good as keeping the ancient ones that are there. and that planting new trees is as good as keeping the mature ones that are there. In all of this, we're being asked to assess the mitigation of harm. We're not being asked to turn a blind eye and say it's not happening in the first place. And again, I'm extremely disappointed with the situation in Baldwin's Gate. Another thing that is cumulative is housing, and we look to those previous appeal decisions as text which can inform us and which makes policy that we have to abide by. But those appeals also represent the delivery of hundreds of homes. We have already delivered in this part of the borough a huge amount of housing, some of it admittedly against our will. That surely has to count for something. It has to be the case that we are able to draw a line somewhere in the sand and say, we don't have to vote for this stuff. Actually, we are contributing to housing. We are contributing to the needs of a growing country and a growing economy, or whatever else the Prime Minister says that he believes this week. I do not want, and I certainly would not in a public forum, say something as crass as, if the Secretary of State wants the houses, well, then she can approve them. But I kind of want to be able, amongst us, to have had a reasoned debate and say, no, there are reasons for refusal of this application. And on balance, our judgment is the harms outweigh the benefits. And on balance, we are comfortable to say, no, we've been deliberate and we have been reasonable, and we have still taken the judgment that actually our plan is sustainable. Our local plan is sustainable. The neighbourhood plan for the villages shouldn't be for nothing. And on that basis, I would like to move refusal, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Holland. The other councillors wishing to speak, Councillor Bryan.
Thank you, Chair. Only feeding into Councillor Holland's comments, loss of character is one that wasn't mentioned. Is that one that we could also put on there as an accumulative reason for refusal?
Well, yes, you could. I mean, obviously, my professional opinion is, and that's what's set out in the report, that because of the location of that housing and the fact that it's adjacent to existing built development, that it wouldn't be harmful. But certainly that it can be subjective, and members are entitled to give that what they consider to be harm greater weight in that balance. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, if I could just come back.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I definitely do think it has significant weight, and as do the objectors and the residents that have written in objections as well, who are feeling the same. And I am only right to put forward their concerns as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bryan. Councillor John Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What's been said about refusal and is over-intensification of building in Baldwin's Gate. That'll hold any water. I doubt it. But that is something really that we should be looking at. These are the wrong type of houses that we need in the borough. We need more modest family homes accessible to schools and medical facilities. These are definitely the right, and we're in the hands of the developer. The developer comes along, uses 5-year housing land supply as a foundation to build these properties. Because again, everything we talk about, eco, the use of cars, destruction of the countryside, it's absolutely ridiculous what's happening, Mr. Chairman. And I know you feel very strongly what I've said in your area, in Loggerheads. So I'd like to just move on from that. Got to look at the east where it goes down to the Moss and the pedestrian access. And it's been mentioned by one of the protesters and by the officers that there's a gateway onto the main road. what the land to the east there, is that going onto the moss? There's a public right of way that runs alongside that. It's not shown on that map. And how far away is that public right of way? And if this is accepted, this planning application, wouldn't be a better access, more safer access, going across there towards the moss on the public right of way and into the village art? But that's if it's could you answer those questions really. But again, I'm not very happy with this planning application, Mr. Chairman. I think it's absolutely appalling. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Bryan. Yeah, okay.
So there aren't any public rights of way. And so you're talking about the potential of having access at this point, are you, over here, or?
Oh, there's a public right of way on that boundary.
Oh.
Yeah, and we're in that area.
Right. Well,
It doesn't show it on that. Sorry, sir. It doesn't show it on that map, the public right of way, and how far away it is
right.
from the boundary of this planning application.
Well, it's not. It doesn't abut the site, and so the applicant couldn't provide any access from out of the site at that point because they don't own the land that's to the other side of the boundary, so that wouldn't be possible. Yeah.
How far away it is, it doesn't show it.
No.
Use your mic.
Sorry, it doesn't show you. I've got it on the definitive map. There's a public right of way, but how far the distance between that boundary and the public right of way? That's.
Well, I don't know the distance, but what I do know is that it doesn't abut the site, and even if it did, as I say, the applicant doesn't own the land to the other side of that boundary, so they couldn't facilitate that.
Councillor Williams. Councillor Bryan.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to carry on from Councillor Williams' point about the wrong mix of housing. Obviously, in Baldwinsgate, we have your 2-storey. I'm sure we have 3-storey. We also have bungalows. I noticed that there isn't any bungalows in this application. That doesn't seem a fitting mix to what's currently in Baldwinsgate right now. I wonder if that could be backed up as a reason of refusal because it doesn't continue with the mix of dwellings that are currently in Baldwinsgate.
There is a mix of dwelling size proposed. There's a mix of 3, 4 and 5. So it's not just that they're all the big 4 and 5. There are, I had got the numbers somewhere of how many 3-bed are proposed.
It's not just the height though, like bungalows provide.
Yeah, I was just going to say about bungalows. I was just saying that there is a proportion of smaller dwellings, but we don't have a policy that sets out that there has to be bungalows. We've allowed other developments, Baldwinsgate Farm Scheme, for example, that has no bungalows within it, and there's 200 dwellings proposed there. Or approved there.
I think the reason that one was because we took it as a refusal and then it went to appeal and was granted as it was. So when we refused it, okay, we maybe didn't put it at that point that it should have bungalows, but that was, I think, the reason, because you only have to probably knock on a couple of doors in Baldwinsgate and people will have that same sentiment about Baldwinsgate Farm, that there are no bungalows in there. And I'm keen to make sure that that's commented on this application.
As I say, though, there's no planning policy requirement for there to be bungalows within there. So if we were to look at refusing the scheme or for that to form part of a reason for refusal, there's no policy basis to substantiate that as a reason for refusal. So I'd be concerned, it's not like they are all just big 5-bed detached houses. So we couldn't use an argument that there isn't a mix of house types, because there's a mix of 3-bed, 4 and 5, and there's no policy requirement for bungalows, so we've got no basis for for refusing it on those grounds, it would be my advice.
Is there not a policy that says we have to provide a similar variant of dwellings that's currently in Baldwinsgate?
I think the policy within the neighbourhood plan requires a mix. But my view is that there is sufficient mix there. But yeah, if members feel differently, then obviously you could include that within your reason, but I would advise that it would be difficult to justify.
Thank you, Councillor Bryan. Councillor Fear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could perhaps just explore what Councillor Bryan said a little bit further. The officer will forgive me, it's probably a lapse of concentration on my part. How many 3-bedroom houses out of the 40 are we talking about here?
12 3-bed,
Okay.
22 4-bed, and 6 5-bed.
Okay, thank you very much. So a not unreasonable number. I was just looking again at the MPPF here and at the relevant paragraph, which is 11, isn't it, D2, which talks about what we have to feel is supervenes on the presumption for development. So here I say in particular it says having particular regard, to use the words in the policy which is in front of me, to key policies for directing development to sustainable locations. Now arguably in the debate this evening one could say that a case has been made to show that this is not a sustainable location in terms of the use of the motor car, the lack of local services and such like. Making effective use of land. Councillor Holland has raised the question about best agricultural land in this regard. Then interestingly, securing well-designed places. Now that's a phrase which is a little bit nebulous, but I would say, you know, that the lack of refuse collection provision here is certainly not a well-designed place. I mean, it's well designed to make lots of money, but it's not well designed for the people who would live in those houses. Arguably as well, I'm just thinking of what Councillor Bryan was saying, that if one looks at the landscape in that regard, arguably the lack of bungalows, the lack perhaps of provision of smaller housing on that side. Again, it shows that this is not, in the opinion of this committee, a well-designed place. The final one, although I note that the very end of the sentence here says that these things should be considered individually or in combination. So presumably any one of those things would be sufficient for the committee to say that this is the harm. But in providing affordable homes, now we all know affordable is a weasel word in that regard. Am I correct in thinking that affordable homes in the MPPF follows the definition of affordability which is often used in planning, namely a fractional discount of the market value rather than affordable in the sense that the man in the street can afford things? I'm just intrigued as to what that phrase means, and I also draw attention to this paragraph. I don't know whether, I'm sure Councillor Holland probably reads it every night, but whether he would wish to incorporate some of this in what he has put before the committee.
Thank you, Councillor Fear. Do you wish to come back very long?
Yeah, just to answer the question about affordable, yes, it would mean affordable as in the definition of affordable, not just cheaper houses.
Thank you for that, Rachel. Councillor Holland.
Chair, in answer to the question posed by Councillor Fear, I think, yes, I would always seek to base decisions, certainly if I'm moving them on policy, and the NPPF is the single most important national policy that we are to have regard to tonight. I've spoken about harms and cumulative harms. Councillor Fear has drawn our attention to that paragraph D2, that part of, it's number 11, isn't it, of the MPPF. In addition to what Councillor Fear very sensibly contributed, in my view, securing well-designed places includes considering as a whole the village to which this application is attached, not just the application in isolation. in my view, it is not a well-designed place if we are yet again approving houses that will be reliant on the motor car. And we've heard it described tonight as another form of limited harm. And I think there are a number of lightweight harms which, if you add them together, can be compelling. And certainly they are, to my way of thinking. So are we, if we vote for this application, contributing to well-designed placemaking? I'm not sure that we are. I think that the application will make a bad situation worse. That again is cumulative harm in my view. But I would certainly wish, if members are persuaded tonight, I note I don't have a seconder yet, but nor has anyone bobbed up and down to say, oh, I want to move a pause, which I know a public speaker asked for earlier. We should pause and wait for undisclosed reasons. But I certainly would want to include that and a reference to that part of the NPPF if we are to refuse it tonight, and if members are willing to vote for the same.
Thank you for that, Councillor Holland. Do you come back? No, okay. Councillor Bryan.
Thank you, Chair. Absolutely happy to second Councillor Holland's proposal for a refusal and thank him for his assistance on it.
Thank you, Councillor Bryan. Sorry, Councillor Gore.
Thank you, Chairman. Still, I'm afraid, some questions about this application. It's can't still get it straight in my mind. Just taking, if I could, a stage further, the point that Councillor John Williams made about the pedestrian footpath. Did we not have anything back from the County Council Highways Authority at all about a pedestrian footpath that seems to lead onto the main road and highway safety issues are around that? So very surprised about that. And secondly, one of the sort of big claims that's made in the report is that the drainage arrangements will not only sort of sort out any drainage problems for the new development, but they're going to help off-site as well. Now, that seemed to me to be a really substantial claim. And I mean, have we any evidence to support that?
Thank you, Councillor Gorton.
First of all, talking about the footpaths, we've absolutely had comments from the Highway Authority. I was saying that we hadn't got anything about public rights of way, but the Highway Authority have responded about many issues and requested additional information and requested revisions to the scheme, and all of that's taken place. But they're satisfied with the access, both vehicular and pedestrian, to the site. There was a transport assessment submitted which looks at all of those aspects. And on the basis of the conclusions of that transport assessment, the Highway Authority was satisfied, subject to a number of conditions which are set out in the recommendation. Right, drainage. Okay. Just bear with me a second. The site is within a flood risk zone 1, which is the lowest risk of flooding. But on the site, there are a couple of things that raise issues in the area. The boggy conditions over to the eastern side of the site. And there's a problem of surface water runoff from land to the west. So it's outside of the site, but the surface water runs off that and forms a route onto this land entering the site. So in looking at designing an appropriate drainage scheme for the site, it needs to be designed to mimic current flows so that the surface water leaving the site should be no greater than the surface water that's there prior to the development, and even reducing where possible uncontrolled flows, so that, because uncontrolled flows would exceed if it was would exceed existing greenfield routes. So greenfield rates. So if you've got a greenfield site and there are uncontrolled flows and you've developed the site with no mitigation, then the flows would exceed how they were previously with the development on there. So the drainage scheme has been designed, and there have been, I've lost count of how many iterations, but the lead local flood authority are extremely thorough and came back to the developer, I think 3 or 4 times, requesting additional information, requesting revisions to the scheme, and so eventually a scheme has been developed which the built development was pulled away from the east, which is the boggy area, and a scheme has been devised that will achieve the necessary standard of mitigation and reduce uncontrolled surface water runoff from within the site. So the flood risk assessment includes a feature to route the surface water through the site to sorry, I can't read my own writing. To the point of outfall over to the east. And those calculations have been provided to size the feature of the drainage, and the lead local flood authority are happy that on the basis of that, there won't be any impact. And in fact, the scheme will be an improvement on what's there at the moment.
You wish to come back?
Can I ask another question, Chairman?
Yes, certainly.
Bus stops. Now, we've been assured that sufficient public transport exists for, people to have choice. One of the claims in the report is that bus stops are within walking distance of the site. Is that really the case? Have we verified that? And can they be safely accessed?
Yes, the answer to both of those questions is yes. The Highway Authority, the Transport Assessment assesses the distance to the bus stops, and it is an appropriate walking distance. The Highway Authority are satisfied, and I think the issue about the bus provision and alternative modes of transport, I think the report acknowledges that, or says that the inspector on the Baldwin's Gate Farm appeal acknowledged that the scheme would undoubtedly result in some additional private vehicle trips, because clearly it isn't possible to catch the bus for certain things. But the inspector acknowledged that the existing level of bus service would provide a genuine choice for future occupiers. And the inspector went on to highlight that the NPPF doesn't require public transport options to be as convenient as private cars, but simply to offer a genuine choice. So that those conclusions of the inspector and a very recent appeal decision have to be given significant weight. There's been no change to the bus provision since that Baldwin's Gate Farm appeal decision. So for us to take a different view would be unreasonable.
The other councillor wishing to speak? Councillor Bryan.
Sorry, Chair. I can't sit and not speak on the back of that. I believe that the provision of bus in the Baldwin's Gate application wasn't 100% accurate, and I think residents were unhappy at some of the descriptions that were given. But moving on from that, Councillor Gordon, I would agree that personally it is within a walking distance, not far. However, it is extremely limited. It doesn't provide a genuine alternative, and at numerous times a week it will stop in Baldwin's Gate and people won't be able to get on because it's full, and it then has to continue on its way, and people have to then make alternative options, late to work, late to school, late to wherever they're meant to be going. I just have to share that anecdote just with the discussion of buses. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bryan. Any other councillor wishing to contribute to the debate? I don't see any indication of that. So I think we ought to be looking at making a decision. We've had it formally proposed that we refuse this, and we've had that seconded, firstly by Councillor Holland and seconded by Councillor Fear, that we should have a refusal. Do I see a counter proposal? Sorry, I do beg your pardon. It's Councillor Bryan that seconded it. So.
So much as I'd like to be Councillor Bryan, Mr. Chairman, I am not.
Thank you for that. Yes. Okay. So we've had it proposed by Councillor Holland and correctly by Councillor Bryan, seconded. As a committee, are we able to make a decision based on that proposal and are in a position to show of hands in support of that? If so, do so now, please. Obviously, unanimously, that this item is refused. Thank you, councillors.
You speak. You speak. Sorry.
Let the gallery empty and we'll consider item 5. Thank you. Item 5 on the agenda is land and garages at Prioryhurst Road, Kidsgrove. Over to you, Rachel. Oh, Jacob's is in that. Okay. Okay, Jacob, you're up.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for being so patient, those of you who are still in the gallery. Hello. Just want to remind you of this case. It was previously brought to committee on 22nd of April and was deferred. The reason why it was deferred was various reasons, which I'll get into shortly, but just to refresh your memories. Brownfield plot of land, some 1,300 metres squared, formerly owned by Aspire before being brought into the ownership of Councillor Simon Jones. It was former domestic garages. He proposes to place 12 shipping containers on the land and to rent these to nearby residents for domestic storage purposes. There's also fences, hard standing, security gates, and the erection of a pergola part of the application. But much of what's described in the plans has already been carried out, and so the permission is being sought in partial retrospect. Last time the case was discussed, the salient issues that we came away with were the clarification of the dimension of the pergola, issues of drainage and lighting. So since that meeting and since the main agenda report was published, I've been to the site myself and I've measured the pergola's dimensions and I've compared those against the dimensions in the latest version of the plans, and I can confirm that these measurements, which I took, accord with the latest amended plans. Measures have been taken to divert surface water. The applicant has conducted percolation tests on the site to establish the speed at which surface water drains. And based on that, has installed a soakaway.
excuse me, repairs have also been made to the pergola guttering. Ordinarily, we wouldn't require drainage details as a requirement of applications of this nature. It's only really on account of members bringing it up. But your officers consider that the measures taken will reduce the likelihood of runoff to neighbouring properties. Now, the applicant has submitted some lighting details. Originally, we were going to deal with this via condition, but in response to your questions when it was last brought to committee, the applicant has submitted some lighting details. We brought these to Environmental Health, who has considered them, and decided that they're insufficient and that additional information would be needed for them to make any sort of a recommendation. They would like to see the lighting details to be in accordance with the guidance of the Institute of Lighting Professionals. In any case, your officers consider that this can be managed via condition at a later date. The hours are as follows. The recommended hours are as follows. 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Saturday, and Sundays and bank holidays at no time at all. There are other more restricted hours recommended for the delivery of containers, which is only to happen between 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Monday to Friday, and with sufficient notice given to affected parties and at least 2 delivery banksmen. Excuse me. Want to make it clear at this stage that we are recommending that permission be granted, but that these are the only conditions under which we are prepared to recommend permission be granted under these strict and restrictive conditions which have been prescribed to ensure that there's no harm in terms of visual amenity or environmental health or of highway safety from any of those points of view. But if there are any further conditions which you would want to impose on top of that, we would be willing to consider adding more. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jacob. And just to remind members that there's a supplementary to that effect on page 37 of the agenda report. If members would like to familiarise themselves with that, if they haven't done so already. We have a speaker on this matter, and is our objector, Mr. Craig Cotterill. Would you like to come forward, sir? You have 5 minutes to make your case. You may begin when you're ready.
On the pergola, it is still too big. It's still only to put solar panels on, so it could be lowered to what you recommended last time, which was 3.25. It's still in the wrong place according to the drawings. He's tried to fit it in, but it doesn't fit. It wants going back to where it was originally, which is 1.8 metres back, in line with 38 and 36 Newchapel Road. So it actually pulls away. It is still on my boundary, and it shouldn't be. It's just an eyesore, and there is lighting on it. There's lighting at the back of it, which keeps going on and off all night. And there's lighting underneath, which is on all night long. So I want all lighting to be at 6 o'clock off. It can be timed, so none of the lights. He's got night vision cameras, so it doesn't need lighting on after the time. As for the times, one afternoon a week. One afternoon a week, we can have people round in our gardens. I pride myself in my garden. You know, I'm terminally ill. My wife's got Parkinson's. We get one afternoon a week. Saturday should be 12 o'clock. 12 o'clock, that's it. There's no reason why it has to be 6 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday. You know, it's just ridiculous that we're looking at that sort of times on a weekend. Nobody'd want that behind their own houses. These are our residents. We've been here 39 years. You know, there's no reason for it. There's no reason for that burglar to be that high, other than he parks his van underneath it and he works underneath it. So bring it down to 3.25. It's going to make no difference to the solar panels. Move it back to where it was originally. Should be sound. All the cabins that have come on, there's 3 cabins on, it's stipulated that they were all to be painted before they came on, pre-treated. We'd like a green coloured or a blue, they said, but green would be more. But they're coming on and they're as rough as anything, and they haven't been pre-treated. The other thing was, they're supposed to be for domestic use. We're getting companies coming on with mixers, mowers, strimmers, messing about with them at the weekends again, on a Saturday afternoon and things like that. So it should be just domestic use. As for the 12, originally on all the property details, you can go and look, there was only 10. There was only 10 garages. So why it suddenly jumped to 12, I don't know. On my deeds, it says 10 garages. So why we suddenly moved to 12, I don't know. It's just a profit thing. You know, it's just getting beyond the joke. I mean, I've been asked, I'm terminally ill, my wife's got Parkinson's, why am I fighting it? Because it's not right what's been done. He's gone against everything that was set out in the first place. He's built things and then altered the plans to suit. And it's just completely and utterly wrong. And I'd like somebody to just stand up and say, look, enough's enough. You know, Saturday, 12 o'clock, give us 2 afternoons a week at least, where we can have a bit of peace, a bit of quiet, nobody on site. Nobody on site after 6 o'clock in the week. That means it doesn't have to be lit up like a bleacher beacon like it is doing. At the back of that pergola now, there's a light right on the corner. Me and my neighbour, every time we go round the back of there, in the back garden, it shines up. It lights the back gardens up. It lights the houses up. Inside, underneath, there's lights, there's strip lights. They're on all day and all night. You know, it's just beyond a joke. It just wants moving back.
Thank you, Mr. Cottrell. The time has expired. Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Over to members for debate. Councillor Brown.
Well, I've had issues like this in my ward where former council stroke Aspire garages have been sold and then there's been an alternative use. And of course, the difficulty is the proximity of residential homes because the site wasn't originally set out like this. So the officer has gone through a number of mitigations and restrictions, which I welcome. But I've got a question. How will the hours of operation be monitored and enforced?
Councillor Brown, to come back.
With conditions like this, obviously with any development, we're not able to, we don't have the resources to go and sit at the site and look when things aren't carried out as they should be. But it's reasonable to to assume, and this is kind of what's the word? Sorry, accepted procedure within planning that when it's adjacent to residential properties, if any of those residential properties were aware of any breaches, that they would let the planning authority know. And it's at that point that we would speak to the applicant and potentially look to monitor it more closely. But yeah, we have no alternative but to rely on the neighbouring properties advising us of any breaches.
Could I come back, Chair?
Yes, Councillor Brown.
That does impose a burden on those residents.
I appreciate that, but obviously there's no alternative because, and that's the same with any any development and any potential breaches. That's how we get advised of those breaches, is by being advised by residents, because we simply can't be everywhere all of the time.
Councillor Gordon, and Councillor Bryan, and Councillor Veer.
Thank you, Chairman. I must apologise. I wasn't at the meeting in April when this application was discussed, so I'm sort of coming to this fairly new. Can I ask, what is the purpose of the pergola? What's, given the nature of the business that's been carried on, and secondly, the hours of operation do seem quite generous, also given the nature of the business that's being conducted. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of the hours of operation, these have been prescribed in consultation with Environmental Health. We sought their statutory consultation before the last committee meeting. And forgive me, what was your other point?
What's the purpose of the pergola?
As far as I'm aware, there is no stated purpose for the pergola. I don't believe that the applicant has given a specific reason as to why it's been erected, except I can only assume cover from the rain.
Those lights.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. Councillor Bryan, then Councillor Veer.
Thank you, Chair. Could planning officers give us some confirmation on whether the pergola is the right height as per the application and is in the right location?
Thank you. Yes, I have, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I have been to the site. I have measured it. It is the right height relative to the current ground level. Now, admittedly, the applicant has laid some further gravel beneath the pergola. But I've investigated this too, and it can't be more than 30 mil, 40 mil. Certainly not enough to materially affect the height of the pergola, and it wouldn't change. It wouldn't change the matter of how the height of the pergola relates to the other properties.
Sorry, two questions.
Excuse me, no shouting from the audience, please.
Sorry, still haven't got an answer on location of the pergola. Is it as per the application? And just so I can be completely clear, what you're saying is that the height of the pergola is right to the ground level because what the applicant has done is put gravel down underneath the pergola, so the height is right. Is that what we're saying?
So in terms of the position of the pergola, I believe it is correct. It's slightly complicated by the fact that the applicant has erected fences at the border of the property which aren't at the boundary of the site as it relates to the neighbouring properties to the rear, Mr. Cottrell's. but I believe that the position of the pergola is correct.
Just to say that when we received an objection early on in the application process to the siting of the position of the pergola, we sought from the applicant confirmation of the boundaries of the site, and we were provided with a copy of the land registry document, which obviously is the approved boundaries of the site, and the boundary as it is actually on site is different to what it is on the land registry document, the land registry plan. So the pergola is closer to the boundary fence than is shown on the plan, but that is because the boundary fence is in the incorrect location if you use the land registry plan as the correct basis for where that boundary is, if that makes sense.
Councillor Fear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the officer has preempted my question. I also want to make an observation which may not make me very popular, but I think it's an important one, which is it's not for us to say what people can and cannot do with their property. It's for us to say whether what they're doing is lawful or not, which is a different thing. But just to go back to this, so if the pergola is in the correct position, are we then saying that the fence is not in the well, shall we say not the correct position, but not on the boundary of the property? And do we have a diagram that can show us that? Because that seems quite an important point at the end of the day. If we could pin that one down, I think it'd be very helpful.
Thank you, Councillor Fear. To respond.
Sorry, bear with me just one moment. Sorry, this is showing the block and location plan right here. Would you just, Councillor Fear, would you just refresh my memory on what your questions were? I'm sorry, you've caught me a bit.
My question is, I hope, a straightforward one, which is what I think I'm hearing is that the boundary fence that we have it at the moment is not at the edge of the property, and therefore the pergola, as I understand it, when the plans were submitted, is shown in relation to the edge of the owned property, not at the edge where the boundary fence is. In other words, the pergola is further away from the boundary as shown on the land registry plans than actually the fence is presently in the position that the fence is presently in. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that's a fair assessment.
It is built in accordance with the submitted plans that you can see before you, but when you see it actually on site, it appears different to that, but that is because the boundary treatment, the fence along the boundary, is in a different location to where the boundary is shown on the land registry plan. But the land registry plan has to be the correct boundary.
Councillor Fee, do you wish to come back?
Yes, if I may, just to make sure that I've got this 100% right, because it seems to me really now quite an important thing. So what we are saying is that the boundary fence in its current position is actually on the land which in actual fact is owned by the applicant. Is that correct? So it's not a boundary fence, it's a fence on someone's land. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Blimey. Okay.
Thank you. Next, we have Councillor Williams and then Councillor Holland.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've talked about this pergola, and if it's no connection to the, well, it's connecting to the business, for what use is it for the business? We should condition it to be taken down. What's the purpose of the pergola? We don't know, and I just doesn't quite sit right with me. Let's condition it that it's taken down. On the point of lighting, I got a lot of sympathy with the speaker, because we live right behind where I live. There's an MOD facility. The lighted floodlights are on all the time. Really heavy, bright floodlights because of the nature of the business of the MOD. They don't need planning permission to do what they want. They can do what they want. So you have to live with that. But behind that, the refurbished nursery, children's nursery, which they put lights, outside lights. And there were a lot of complaints from the neighbours, because at night time, if a cat or whatever ran through the premises, these lights would come on and they'd stay on for 4 minutes, 5 minutes. It was quite alarming because they were that bright, really actually brighter than the MOD lighting. And that's, I suppose, with security. So where we are talking about this particular development, and I agree with, if you put security lights in with a sensor, those lights will be on and off all night. There's family pets will running through the site. So I don't think that should happen. And with good intention, where the lights, wherever way the lights are shining, these lights, these modern lights, don't particularly shine in one particular spot. They brighten the whole of the area up. That's the design of those particular lights. So really, you should be conditioning the lighting. I don't think then the lighting of the business, out of business hours, there should be no lighting other than maybe a street light that's on a particular wattage or whatever you call it, setting out the light. So if you put security lights in, they are a real concern to the neighbours. There will be a concern to the neighbours because they'll be off and on all night. So the sensors really are really shouldn't be on. So 8 hours of business, there should be no lighting on that site. But if the applicant wants some kind of street lighting, at the same, what same as street lighting is now, no problem with that. But as far as sensors and searchlights, no way. We shouldn't condition it. There's no way. It shouldn't be off. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I think the officer wants to come back on that, please.
Just in the relation to your point about why the pergola is required, it's not for us to dictate what he can or can't, or what a person can or can't have on their land. What we need to do is assess whether that structure, in this case, is acceptable in terms of its impact on the neighbouring properties. Our view as professional officers is that given the height of the boundary fencing that's there on site anyway, the presence of existing outbuildings in the gardens of the neighbours, and the fact that this is an open-sided pergola structure, we don't consider that it's so overbearing on the amenity of the neighbours that we could justify a refusal on those grounds. So it's not enough to just say, well, if you're not telling us why you need it, you shouldn't have it. We can only assess, will it be harmful to the neighbouring residents? And my professional view is that it's not so significantly harmful that we can justify a refusal. And in terms of the lighting, the applicant has submitted some details as requested by committee last time. He's submitted details of where the lights are going to be. As we've said, they've been considered by environmental health, and they believe that additional information is required along the lines that you've said, such as the level of the luminance, the direction of the lighting, etc. And it's quite commonplace for those sort of details to be sought via condition. And so that's what we're recommending here is the imposition of a condition requiring further details of the lighting to be submitted, which we would liaise with environmental health to ensure that they're satisfied that it will be acceptable in that residential location.
Going to come back, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Good. If he does give permission, this development, and the lighting's on, so we come back. You know, if he says it really upsetting to the neighbours, the lighting comes on, and in the case I've talked about back where I live, the lighting just comes on and off, and really then they have to complain and they have to turn them down or turn the sensor down. So obviously that could happen. So can we condition that come on? But with respect to the officer, we've heard what's a pergola to do with the business for storage. And we're talking about a planning application with storage, with containers, put stuff into storage. So really, we as a planning committee can say, hold on, there's no use for the pergola. We won't want a pergola. I mean, like what you're saying is, you can't find any, reason to say no, you can't have it. But really, it isn't part of the business. So I'm surely, as a planning committee, we can say, well, sorry, we don't accept the pergola.
But what we've said, what Jacob has said as the case officer, is that we have not been made aware by the applicant of what the purpose is. But that's not to say that there isn't a purpose. And unfortunately, we haven't got that information before us. But it may well be that, it's to a sheltered location that's out of the rain for when people come to bring their goods to the site or whatever, and before they put it into the container, they're sorting things out, or for the applicant as the business owner, for him to be a presence on site sometimes. I don't know, because I can't say for definite, because we've not asked the question and he's not given us that information, but that's not to say that there isn't a purpose for it. And as I say, we can only take issue with that and refuse that. We would have to refuse the whole application. We couldn't just say, you can't have the pergola. We would have to refuse the whole application. We can't split that decision. And we can only do that if we have a material reason for objecting to the pergola in terms of the harm that it's causing.
Chairman, see what other members want.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Councillor Holland is next.
Oh, sorry.
I'll put you down for now.
Thank you, Chair. There is an epistemology of boundaries. I feel as though we've touched something extremely nuanced tonight, and I will be thinking about it for a little while to come. I think just in what Councillor Williams has said, I think again, we have identified a training opportunity for the committee. I know that planning training is compulsory, and I think that it might well be useful for us all to have some refreshment as regards quite what we're allowed to ask in terms of the purpose of structures that are proposed. Can I express sympathy for the public speaker we had tonight who disclosed that he has a health condition, and I'm extremely sorry to hear that. Directly related to that, quiet enjoyment of one's property is an important principle. There were three things that were raised in objection. Okay, prior to that, let's say I think it's a good idea for us. I'm glad that we deferred this at the last meeting. The additional detail that we've received, particularly the photographs that our officer took when they were on site, and also the measurements that have been provided, are genuinely helpful to us in reaching the proper decision here. There were three matters raised in objection that I'd like to touch on. I think the first one is the location and the height of the pergola. I'll differentiate myself slightly from Councillor Fear in saying that I'm not certain that the exact location of the legal boundary, which is a civil law matter outside of our remit, is the defining factor. In my view, the defining element ought to be whether the structure or structures that are going to be erected or have already been erected meet the space around dwellings requirements, and whether or not what has been erected and what is planned matches what we are being asked to approve tonight. And I am satisfied, based on the information we received from our officer, which I wasn't certain of last time, but I am now, that what we're approving tonight matches physically the location and nature of objects that are going to be on this site when this permission, if it's granted, is fully implemented. So that my mind has been set at rest in that regard. The two other issues then, first was lost my way now. The third one I'll do first then, which is the lighting. We've been told by officers that it was operational hours. In terms of the lighting, we've been assured that there is going to be a condition attached to this that requires submission of further details. Can we refine our permission tonight, if we choose to grant it, to include a requirement that when those details of lighting are submitted, our officers won't approve them unless, firstly, light leakage, light pollution is minimised to neighbouring dwellings to protect their amenity during the operating hours, I mean. So light leakage from the site, so far as is possible, will be managed and controlled in that way. And secondly, that outside of the operating hours, no lighting other than what is necessary for the purpose of securing the site will be in operation. So it's possible to justify lighting outside of operation hours on security grounds. And of course, if you run a storage company, that's one of the main things your customers are looking for is this area secure, is it safe? But I think it's reasonable for us to say, okay, outside of operating hours, it's reasonable to have lights on for security purposes. It's not reasonable to have motion sensor lights, particularly at the boundary, that don't contribute towards security, but that could well harm residential amenity of neighbouring properties. And coming back to the second thing that I was going to say, operating hours, I would be happy to consider in the round whether they're appropriate, but we've got to compare what usage being made of the site now with what usage was made of it when they were garages. And of course, when they were private garages, there were no time limits. When those garages were being used, if you had a vehicle and you owned one of those garages or you rented it from Aspire, you could rock up at any hour and store your car and drive away. I think, and again, residents nearby might not agree with this, but on the basis that it's been clarified by our officers that those hours that are recommended in consultation with environmental health, and they don't represent any kind of negotiation with the site operator, the applicant, or any other person, I'm loath to say that we can change them. So we heard tonight we'd like, a neighbour of the application would like them to be restricted even further. I'm not sure we could sustain that. I'm not sure it'd be possible for us to sustain that as an appeal. God forbid such a thing should happen in this application. But what I think we could certainly look at more strongly is that the wording of the condition and the wording of the restrictions that are placed on lighting. Did I make sense when I said, so during operational hours, let's minimise light pollution. Outside of operational hours, let's limit lighting on the site to what is reasonable for that business to operate securely and safely, because I can imagine that it would be an awful thing, as Councillor Williams said, to have a motion sensor light that blinks on and off at all hours, potentially for no reason. I will conclude my remarks there. I'll stop short of moving the recommendations until we've had clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hollands. Just to come back on that.
The short answer is yes, we can do that. The comments from environmental health were making specific reference to the need for the lighting to accord with the Institute of Lighting surveyors, whatever it was, and that sets out in a lot of detail what level of lighting is appropriate within what type of location, so adjacent to residential dwellings, for example. So yes, I've taken detailed notes of your requirements, and we can include that within the wording of the condition.
Thank you. I have Councillor Fear and then Councillor Gillian Williams.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Holland in front of me talked about the epistemology of boundaries. Having just pulled up the land registry site to check these things, I think actually with legal boundaries, there's metaphysics involved as well. But those things aside, let's not be frivolous about what is a serious matter. As I see it, I'm in agreement with Councillor Holland that actually the only matter of concern for us here is the issue of lighting and the loss of amenity that causes. I note that we want to do this by condition, and thinking back into the past, that is the way that these things have regularly been resolved. What I would suggest to the committee is that if we feel particular concern about this, we should entrust you, Mr. Chairman, with judgment about those conditions, that you should have sight of them before this application is finally signed off. And I will be perfectly happy to trust your judgment in that regard. As regards everything else, I can't see here that there is any well-founded objection at all. And I would also like to strongly express my opinion, and I'd like to see if our officers agree with it, that actually it is no business of this committee whatsoever to determine what use or not use things are on their property. I have 3 garden gnomes in my back garden. They serve no use whatsoever. Whether they are to the aesthetic taste of other members of this committee is neither here nor there, and frankly is none of their business. The only As I was going to say, Councillor Holland, the only reason the committee could be interested in such things were if those gnomes were grotesquely illuminated at night, were 20 foot tall, and in fact they're about 6 inches high, and would cause loss of amenity by their presence. But the fact that I choose to put gnomes on my property is my business and no one else's. In the same way, what people choose to do with their property, as long as it is lawful, is not for this committee to decide. And I think that that's an important point we need to think about, and I wonder if our officers would agree, without prejudice to their taste in gnomes.
Yeah, I think just at risk of repeating myself, yeah, it's not for us to judge why something is there or not there. What we're here for is to consider whether that is acceptable in terms of the planning merits. So what it looks like, whether it will have any adverse impact on the neighbouring residents. And they are the only things that we are able to consider. And your officer's view is subject to the things that we've discussed and the conditions about lighting, etc. We're satisfied that it is appropriate, and therefore we're recommending approval of that. And as I said previously, in response to what Councillor Williams said, we couldn't just put a condition on saying you can't have the pergola. We would have to refuse the entire application.
Councillor Fear, are you content with that response?
I am, Mr. Chairman, and I am content to move that we accept the report in front of us with the condition that you have sight of the lighting conditions prior to the permission finally being given.
Thank you, Councillor Fear. I'm happy to entertain that condition, should it be approved. And that's seconded by Councillor Holland. But before we go any further, I need to hear from Councillor Jill Williams, who indicated she was just
a question, actually. Nobody can see what point the pergola is. If he wants to do another type of business on there, like mending cars under pergolas, which we all see, having parties and whatever, if he wants to use that pergola for any type of business, does he have to come back?
Sorry, yes, he would need to come back. And part of the conditions that we'd outlined in the report is a sui generis use class, sui generis meaning of its own kinds, that it would only ever be for the uses that he's described and for no other.
Any other councillor wishing to speak? Okay, in that case, we've had it formally proposed by Councillor Fear and seconded by Councillor Holland that we approve this subject to the conditions that we've mentioned and the additional conditions that I have sight of the lighting arrangements once they are finalised. Are we content that that is a true and accurate picture of things? And are we happy to support that recommendation as approved by the proposer and seconder? Can I see a show of hands, please? Thank you, councillors. That item is passed. Moving on to agenda item 6 of the report, land at Doddlespool, Betley. And I've been indicated to that there's no further update other than printed. Are we content to receive this and to keep it on the agenda? I see a show of hands in support of that, please. Thank you. That is unanimous. Bring us on to agenda item 7. Tonight's business is the yearly planning committee site visit dates for the forthcoming year, 2025-26. Are we content to receive this as written? Or do we have any amendments we'd like to make on this? In that case, can I see a show of hands, please, in support of this? Thank you. That item is unanimously passed. Brings us on to the next item of business, which is urgent business. I have one item of urgent business tonight, and that's item on 8, and it's for the Historic Buildings Grant for 7 Iron Market, Newcastle. This item is considered urgent as the contractors need to commence work before the next scheduled meeting of the Planning Committee, so hence it's been brought tonight for your urgent attention, and you will have had a sight of the paper subjected by our clerk this evening and the subsequent recommendation. Over to you. Councillor John Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could we identify the building in the town centre? Because we're all interested in the town centre and its historical buildings. So could we identify it, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. That is a great question.
I did have a Google Street View image of it on my screen, but my laptop's died. So Jacob's just getting it on his now. But it's so on the Iron Market, you've got you know, the York Place. If you were looking at York Place, and then you go to the right, there's a newsagents on the corner, and then it's the next one to that. And then I think there's is it Bayfields or an opticians, and then the Posh Watch shop. It's the.
Am I correct in thinking it's the one that the fascia fell off some time ago?
Yeah, and it's partly boarded up. So it's that one. Yeah, it's in a real state as it is at the moment. Yeah. It's about 2 up from there. So just keep going down that way. Yeah. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. So now just go around. So you to the right of there. That's the one. Yeah. To the left of Bayfields.
That's fair enough. I mean, what I ask is, there's a lovely building just by the cafe on your right hand side is going up, and a lot of work has been done on that.
Okay.
It's quite unique. So just thank you. Move the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I'm happy to second that. Can I see a show of hands in support of that, please? And that's unanimously passed. Thank you very much, councillors. I haven't been informed of any other further urgent business, so I'd like to bring the meeting to a close. Thank you for your indulgence and participation in tonight's meeting. Wish you all a safe and comfortable journey home. Thank you. Good night.